what's like a really common mistake that first time or beginner writers will make in terms of writing quests?
Well, the first mistake people make that I see all over the AU is formatting. For us, we have a very strict format, and it's necessary so that implementers can read what's going on and understand. And if you don't know it, you don't know it, and it's not intuitive necessarily. It's not necessarily something that you jump into and go, "Oh, well, that makes total sense. Of course, that's going to be in purple." Um, So getting used to that is a really big mistake. The other really big one that I see a lot is treating it like a book where you can talk for ages and ages and ages. In quests, you need to have a back and forth between NPCs and the player, otherwise, the player disengages. And so you have to be able to alternate rather than just have the NPC tell a story. This isn't a movie, it's a game, so you have to make sure that the player is engaged in that story. Otherwise, they will check their phone, and you don't want your players checking their phone. So that's one thing that I definitely see a lot of beginners and more seasoned writers fall into. Good questions all around. Let's get started on fetch quests now. Hopefully everyone who wants to be here is here. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation. And quick disclaimer, I am at a house where downstairs there's a bridal shower happening. So hopefully it will be quiet. But if you hear anything in the background, it is probably people cheering as the bride comes in and things like that. So if that happens, we'll just carry on. But that's what that is. I figured I would let you all know. So welcome to That's So Fetch, a guide to writing engaging fetch quests and other quests as well, but particularly fetch quests. So what are we going to be looking at today? Well, a lot. We're going to be talking about what is a fetch quest, really? Why would you do one? Why would you do this severely maligned type of quest that everybody rolls their eyes at? Why not just do full, extensive quests for everything and disregard the fetch quests? Well, we'll talk about it. Then Logos, Pathos, and Ethos. If you don't know what those are, you're going to learn. If you already do know what those are, you're going to learn how to apply those to game writing. So hopefully that will be useful for people. I think it's a really good way to look at quests in general, not just fetch quests, but especially when you're looking at fetch quests, it's vital in some ways. Key elements to a good fetch: what makes a fetch worthwhile, worth your time, and how can you make sure the player felt like they put the right amount of time into something and right amount of energy into something and got the right reward. Key elements of how to make it good. The 4 stages of a fetch. There are 4 distinct stages within a fetch quest, even though they are not necessarily journaled stages. They are still story beat stages, and they're important to look at because there are things that you can do in each one of them that is different from the others. So we'll look at that. And then we will have time at the end for a Q&A. That can be on fetch quests. That can also be on any questions about writing in general, like you just had. I'm happy to answer everything that I can at this point. I've worked as a writer, I've worked as a lead, and I've worked as a teacher, so I'm happy to share anything that I know. So, getting started, what is a fetch? Well, go get the thing, bring the thing back, and get money, essentially. Doesn't have to be money, can be different types of reward, doesn't have to be a thing, can be a person, can be multiple things. But essentially, a fetch quest is go and get the thing, bring it back, be rewarded. Now, technically speaking, fetch quests are non-journaled quests. And what that means is you don't have to write journal entries for this. And in your game journal itself, these would fall under miscellaneous, not a quest that has a heading and all sorts of information about what it is. It'll be things like retrieve the book for insert NPC name here. That does not mean they have to be boring. That does not mean they have to be simple. It just means that they are not journaled. So you can have a double objective as well, where your first objective is do the thing and your second objective is bring it back, but they will still mostly show up on the miscellaneous quest list. This is not an always thing, but it is a general rule. So what are some types of quests? Well, it's not just get one thing. It could be gather a certain amount of specific items. We've all done that. 20 death bells for various alchemists, that sort of thing. It could be delivering a package or a letter, which is sort of a reverse fetch. You're bringing something to someone as opposed to you actually getting something and bringing it back. So a little bit of a reversal there, still essentially a fetch. Getting news and returning with it doesn't have to be a physical thing. You're still going, getting it, and coming back. You're retrieving a lost item. You're collecting parts of a broken item that will then be reforged or remade, maybe by you, maybe by the NPC. Doesn't really matter, still a fetch. And then rescues, rescuing a person or an animal. Now, you can also think of stealing quests, like the sort of generic Thieves Guild quests where you go herring off into somebody's home, steal a vase and come back, those types of things. They're essentially fetch quests as well. You're just stealing instead of getting the thing. And then when you think of the Jarl needs someone to kill some bandits type quest, that is also a close relative. They're not quite the same, but a close relative of the average fetch. You're going, you're doing the thing you've been asked to do, and you're coming back. And it's not journaled, it's just a thing that you do, a simple task, and then you get rewarded. And then the final ones are the assassinations, like you get in the Dark Brotherhood, where you have a specific target, and you go, you kill, you come back. These are all variants on the quest form. So when you think of fetch quests, don't just think of the first one where you're just gathering a lot of flowers. People generally think of that first, that they have to fetch something unimportant or do something annoying and repetitive for a fetch quest. Not what a fetch quest is. Not at all. Why would you do a fetch quest? So, as I've pointed out, many people consider fetch quests, when they hear the words fetch quest, to be something that you should avoid. Oh no, you don't want your quest to turn into a fetch. This quest is just a fetch. Well, yeah, but there are reasons why you would include these. For instance, say you do have to collect a bunch of items. Well, those bunch of items are spread out, and you haven't necessarily been to this area yet. So it gives you an excuse and a reason for area exploration. And as a game writer, you want your player to explore the area. Certainly your level designer wants them to explore and appreciate all the work they've put in. So area exploration is absolutely a good idea for a fetch. If you have to look around for something, you have to look around you and get familiar with your surroundings. Lore learning. You can learn a lot about the civilization that you're working with, whatever that is, whether it's the current civilization or a past civilization, through a fetch quest by placing it in different destinations and having the player have to do certain tasks as they go along, or exposing them to new things. An example of that a little bit, this is a journaled quest, so it's not an official fetch, though we'll talk about that in a second. But the Gildergreen quest, where you have to go and get the sap from the mother tree, you learn a lot during that quest about the religion, about the effect of faith, and how there really is a connection to nature throughout. You don't do anything but go get it and come back. You're technically doing a fetch. There's a first part to that quest which makes it less fetchy, but for the most part, you are doing a fetch for that portion of the quest, and you are learning along the way. Fetching also allows you an opportunity to build relationship with your NPCs. If you've come to a new town and an NPC explains to you why they need you to do a quest for them, you can perform that task, and in doing so, become closer to that NPC or further away, depending on what you decide to do with your fetch quest. You can get a greater appreciation of the town and the people living within it. If you are asked to fetch something or deliver news from one person on one side of the town to the other, you have to interact with people. It's forcing interactions for your player, but in a way that is natural and organic, as opposed to you have to talk to 5 people before you can move on in this game. That's really dull. It is also immersive. Not all things that people have to do are grand. Not everything needs to be an epic journey. That's not how lives work. Sometimes you just need to deliver a letter. And so it helps with the feeling that we are in a real place, not just one of those leveled games where you are a hero all the time and all you do is hero stuff. If you're a real person, you're going to do fetches at some point. So, I'm going to tell you a story, and you're going to wonder why, and then I will explain. So this is a story about the United States Air Force in 1950. And the United States Air Force had a really big problem in 1950 because they had some of the best planes in the world, they had some of the best pilots in the world, and the planes kept crashing and the pilots kept dying. And nobody could figure out why, because the planes were designed for the average pilot. They were scientifically engineered to have all the measurements of an average pilot. This should not be a problem. Well, they took the measurements again of 4,000 pilots, and they discovered that not a single one of those pilots was actually average. Not a single one of them fit all 10 measurements that they measured. And in fact, 97% of people didn't even fit 3 out of the 10 when they were randomly chosen. So there is no such thing as an average pilot, it turns out. So the military decided to make some adjustments, naturally, and they created adjustable cockpits and seats that could move forward, back, up, depending on the height or leg length of the pilots, and suddenly people stopped dying, planes stopped crashing, and the Air Force became a lot better. So the reason I'm telling you this is there is no such thing as an average fetch. There is no textbook fetch. And what we're about to talk about, all of the techniques that we're going to go through, pick and choose. Don't try and do them all. If you were to try and do them all, it would be contrived and feel really weird, and you would have worked way too hard. So consider these as options and guidelines rather than rules of how to build a quest, because every quest is different. And you'll notice when I give examples that I will say, well, this isn't actually that fetchy, or this has a little bit of different things about it than a standard fetch quest. That's because there is no standard. There really isn't. But that's what makes questing fun. So why would you want there to be? Logos, Pathos, and Ethos. So this is originally a school of thought invented by Aristotle, and it's types of argument. But I've applied it here to types of game writing. Logos is essentially logic. Something needs to be figured out, and you need to figure it out with your brain. You don't need to use anything but your brain, but you need to engage your brain to solve the problem. Pathos, or pathos, is emotion. Somebody needs help and you feel for them. You are connected to them emotionally, and therefore you want to help them. Ethos is the one that people are always a little bit confused by because it is ethics. And really what that means is something important needs to be decided and you need to make a choice. And there may be 2 right answers and there may be no right answers, but you have to weigh your options and look at what is right for this situation. So Logos, Pathos, and Ethos are key elements of your quest as well. Let's take a look at each of them. Starting with Logos. Logos is advanced planning. This is when you show up to a location and it is not as easy to navigate as you thought. So you have to ask yourself, how do I get to my goal? How do I actually achieve what I need to achieve? I need to get the thing I have been tasked to get, and there is something standing in my way. How do I get around it? What skills do I use? This is a great roleplay opportunity for you to think like your character. Because if you are playing a massive bruiser character, you're going to do something very different than if you're playing a stealth archer or if you're playing a mage. So roleplay opportunities abound for things that require logic. An example of using logos in quests would be forgotten names, which many people never hit. They never get in their Skyrim playthroughs. It is a quest given in the under parts of the College of Winterhold, and it is given by notes or a journal, which is fine, still qualifies as a fetch, even though it's not a NPC who is giving it to you. And the notes say that you need to get 4 rings that are locked up in a chest. You need to figure out how to get those rings because they're in a public place. So how do you steal those without getting caught? Do you steal them? Do you persuade someone to give them to you? You have to consider your options. Once you've gotten the rings, you put them on a demonic hand, very creepy looking, and you have to do that in the right order. In order to do that, you need to reread the notes, you need to think about it clearly, and you need to be able to order your options, or just cheat and look it up. But if you're really playing the game, you need to be able to logically come to a conclusion about what order would be ideal. After that, you encounter a Daedra. Very simple. You get a reward, or you get a fight, or you get both, and you're done. So that type of fetch does not actually have a return element to it. Remember what I said before about every fetch being slightly different and not all of them following the rules. In fact, most of them not. Forgotten Names is a little bit more than your classic fetch, but it is still an example of logic. That's the sort of thing that I'm talking about when I'm saying logos. So some examples of how you would also use that. If a fortress is guarded, do you attack head on? Do you use stealth? That's a roleplay example, as well as a just sensible, if there are 20 people, I should probably not attack them by myself sort of thing. Dwarven puzzles, anything Dwarven, including not just the official puzzles, but the traps, getting around traps without getting you or your follower killed. And then locations of objects that are given in clues like letters or maps, where you collect bits of a torn letter to get a message that will give you the location of what you need to find, something like that, where you have to decipher. You have to use your brain for logos. For Pathos, you need to use your heart. You have to help the quest giver because you are emotionally connected to them. The quest giver needs you, and you should feel that need. If you are playing a well-constructed quest with Pathos, you will feel that need. This is hard to do. It is not impossible, and it results in some of the best quest experiences. So roleplay is also in play here. You get to feel what your character feels. If your character is the sort of person who does not give an inch and does not care about the right thing to do, but will only do what is right for them, they will have different emotional responses. But if you are playing a more heroic character who is very empathetic, they will allow you to feel different things. An example of this is Missing in Action, which you get very early on as well from Freya Greymane. Her son is missing, and you see her being essentially bullied about the fact that she has a son who is missing in action, and it can make you care as a player. It doesn't have to, but it can, and that is definitely what its goal is from a writing perspective. the writer wants you to care about Freya and her plight of not having her son and not knowing what happened to him. So to incorporate that kind of pathos, you have to set up a story, which can be done through watching a scene as it is in that quest. It can also be done through NPC interaction and things like that. Pathos takes more setup than Logos. Logos, you can just throw someone at a puzzle and they know it's a puzzle and then they try and solve it. But people don't know that they're essentially being emotionally manipulated by the writer. And you don't want them to, because then they're not in the game. So it's a much more subtle way to write. It's a much more subtle aspect to incorporate into your quest writing. Some examples of this: woman's husband was wrongly executed and the jailers kept his wedding ring. Why would they do that? What assholes. You get to feel that sense of how dare they. If a wounded, dying man needs his girlfriend to know he wants her to move on and live her life and not mourn him, you feel empathy for him and for the girlfriend who is going to be feeling loss. And you do that quest not for the reward necessarily, though you probably still get one because it's a quest, but because it feels like the right thing to do for you. And then damsel in distress is always a pathos situation. You have to feel something for that. If someone needs rescuing, then you feel the intrinsic need to be the rescuer. Ethos is, as I said before, a little tricky, but it is essentially doubt. You are incorporating doubt into your quests. What is the right thing to do? Should you really complete this task the way that you've been asked to? This incorporates both the thinking aspect, because you have to go through logical steps and go, well, if this happens, then this will happen. But you also have to incorporate your own emotions. Does this person deserve to die? Does this person need this object when it is being used by another group successfully, and another group would perish if you gave it back to the original owners? An example of this that is an assassination quest is Morning Never Comes. This is the Muiri quest in Dark Brotherhood. Muiri has asked you to assassinate her seducer, which is fine. That's a standard assassination. Nothing going on there. You do feel for her, and it does incorporate some pathos when she explains how he seduced her and ruined her life. It's a quite engaging, well-written story there. But then she asks you to kill her former best friend, Nilsine. This is an ethical question. Should you do this, take the reward, and side with someone who may not be fully thinking things through at the moment, or do you spare the person who was not your contract? That's an ethical dilemma. That is something that you can incorporate even in small fetch quests. Because if you think about that, Muiri's quest is essentially two fetches. One, kill the ex, and one, kill the friend. It's just individual bits. There are just two of them, two fetches, not one. But it is still a fetch format for that. So an example is if an imprisoned man begs for news of his wife and the player finds out she's cheating, should the player tell the imprisoned man, or should the player make it clear that the wife is missing him and hopes that he'll come home soon? What should the player actually do to keep people happy or to tell the truth? Then there's always the player gets to decide who actually is ruler situation, which can be a fetch. It really can. If all you needed to do was go and find the royal crown which had been stolen and bring it back, you can choose who you're going to give it to. That is a dilemma. Do you go with the more stable conservative side? Do you go with the more reform side that could lead to some riots and volatility? We don't know. You get to choose as a player. So incorporating ethos is great. Not necessary all the time, but great to spice up your quests. Key elements to a good fetch. There needs to be a coherent reason for your quest. If there is no real reason for the player to do it, the player will not do it. There needs to be a feasible expectation of how long it is going to take. And there needs to be a reward that makes sense, that isn't random. Let's look at that a little more closely. Sensible reasons for the quest. Why can't the NPC just do it themselves? If all you need to do is collect some flowers, for instance, there are flowers everywhere. The NPC could just go get the flowers. They don't need you to do that, and why should you want to? However, if the NPC is unable to do it, maybe they are forced to remain at their job or have a family, maybe what they're looking for is actually quite rare, or they can't identify it themselves, but they think maybe your experience would allow you to, then you have a story. But make sure the NPC can't just do it themselves. What makes the player uniquely suited to doing this quest? Is it because they're the Dragonborn? Is it because they're a warrior? What if they're not a warrior? Is it because they have a certain amount of skill points in something? Or is it a character trait? Have they proven themselves trustworthy? What makes the player uniquely suited to the task at hand? And why does the NPC trust the player? If you wander into a town, this bothers me about Whiterun, actually. If you go into Whiterun, you run into Amarin, and he immediately says, hey, my father's heirloom sword is missing. I feel lost without it. Can you get it for me? Why would he trust the player to do that? He doesn't know the player. Now, you don't need to be close friends with every NPC for them to ask you for a favor, but you should have more setup for what the NPC knows about your character that would make them want to engage with you and ask you something important. Playtime considerations. So, depending on the intensity of the quest, the appropriateness of the reward, etc., fetch quests can go on from any length of time, from maybe 5-10 minutes to your entire playthrough. Stones of Baron Zaya? Anybody? Yeah. It can be your entire playthrough that you are doing a fetch quest. And you should be aware of that. How much time does the player need to sink into what is essentially a simple format quest? Even if it's a very interesting one, it is not a complicated format. You're not asked to do multiple steps and stages the way you are with other quests. So knowing that is helpful in the writing process, just as it is helpful in the playing process to know, oh, this I can do, it's not going to take me forever. So be aware of the player's time and be respectful of it. They have a lot of other things to complete, and if they get bored of the fetch, they won't finish it, or they'll finish it later when they've disengaged from it and just want to clear things off their journal. Reward. The reward must match the fetch. Money is a cop-out. If you have to use a monetary reward, go for it. It's fine. At least it's not wrong. But imagine if you did something for an apothecary and they end up giving you a circlet of illusion as a reward. What does that have to do with the apothecary, with what you did for them? The reward needs to match in some way thematically with what you have just done. It also needs to be appropriate for difficulty. And by difficulty, I don't mean like legendary or like play difficulty. That's not what I mean at all. What I mean is, if it was hard to get the thing, you should be rewarded in equal measure to the amount of effort that you put in. You should be given more of a reward if you had to fight your way through a den of spiders, solve a puzzle, and save someone than if you had to collect flowers. It should also be interesting in terms of your reward. Most people just immediately sell the amulets and circlets that they make or that they get from quests because they can enchant their own. That's a lot stronger a lot of the time. But it's still more interesting for them to get something that is a physical representation, a physical item, than it is for them to just get gold. Gold is thoughtless. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to see it. You don't have to in any way engage with it. Whereas if it's the amulet of darkest thought, you have to look at the stats on that and go, ooh, that's interesting. Or, oh, no, I already have one like that. You have to engage with it even if you don't like it. So make sure that your reward is interesting for these fetches and that it matches what you've been asked to do and that it is appropriate for how hard the player had to work. So there are 4 stages of a fetch quest, and these are not implementation stages. These are story beat stages. They are not journaled stages. They are not stages that the player would ever see, but they are stages that the writer needs to know about. They need to understand that there are 4 distinct portions to every fetch quest. And this is true of every fetch quest, really. Like this guideline does apply most of the time. You can't really skip these. Dispatch. This is when you get the quest. And what I want to look at over the next couple slides is how to make these interesting. You might have noticed on the previous slide I had the chemical element of surprise. I really like that picture. Surprise is vital throughout a fetch quest to make it something memorable and not just something that the player did when they were thinking of something else and needed to fill some time. So each of the 4 stages will provide opportunities for different types of surprises. So here are some. It is always cool when the quest giver is unusual. If it's just a shopkeeper who needs a thing, fine. You expect them to when you talk to them. And it isn't new and it isn't exciting. You can make new exciting things in the later stages out of those quests, but it is nice if you are going to be giving a quest, if you give it from an unexpected source. Children are great for this. If you get a quest from a child, that takes you aback. That's not normally how it works. If the person that is giving you the quest is behind a locked door, or you can't see them, or you aren't allowed to see them until after the fetch, but they send you their emissary to give you the quest, and one of your rewards is actually meeting them, that is more interesting than just your average NPC who needs something fetched. Quests can be given non-verbally. They do not need to be NPC linked. A letter can be passed to the player character. It can be, shoved under a door. A missive can be found in an abandoned house that you're looting, because let's face it, we're always looting. And then there can also be posted advertisements. These are non-specific to the player, but they are still a good way to start a quest if you need to. The thing about quests that are given non-verbally is that they are almost impossible to engage with emotionally. There is no pathos in non-verbal quest giving. You have no one to attach to. So you have no option to feel for the person who is giving you the quest, because you're not getting it from a person, you're getting it from a letter. It doesn't mean that you can't craft a really good quest around that. Just know that that's sort of an option that you've blocked off, that you're going to be using other options instead. Reasons for the quest should be interesting as well. Maybe someone's looking for proof that they're actually nobility. That's something that you don't look for a lot. Maybe it's revenge. Revenge is always fun. Make sure that the reason for the quest is engaging and makes the player think, rather than just, I need these things because I need these things. Really? Get them yourself. A thing to note is the NPC can give you a reason for the quest. The NPC doesn't need to give you the actual reason for the quest. The NPC can lie. That's totally fine. You can do an entire fetch quest believing one thing and then find out afterwards that in fact the NPC's motivations were a little bit more nefarious, or they had an ulterior motive. As long as you have a reason for the quest that is actually engaging as a player, I'm saying, you can succeed at continuing the quest and no longer have that question of, should I really do this? It doesn't seem like it's going to be that interesting. It just doesn't have to be the truth. It just has to be interesting. The journey is the next portion. And this is actually more straightforward than you'd think. Not a lot of surprises actually happen along the journey. You can be ambushed, I suppose. You can have creature encounters. You can go interesting places. But most of your surprise happens when the quest is given, when you reach your destination, and when you return. The journey is the most straightforward, even though it is the longest in terms of how long it takes the player to do the thing. The journey takes way longer than just getting a quest, but from a writing perspective, not nearly as complex. Note that when you are creating encounters and locations, if you are trying to make them interesting and new and cool, you need to consult your team. If you are on a project, that means going to the head of level design and saying who is going to be doing this area, who would be implementing my quest, who would be designing my quest. Work with your team on this to make interesting things. Often there are locations that are preset. When you are joining, if you have not already joined, but when you are joining a project, very few of them are in the absolute baby stages. A lot has already been set before you go in. So make sure you don't double up with something. Make sure what you're describing is actually possible and fits the lore. And the way that you find that out is you talk to your team. You talk to your lead, you talk to level design, etc. One other thing about map markers. A lot of people think that they can incorporate more of a challenge into their quest if they don't use map markers. What that really does is it makes the player annoyed, because the player can always turn off map markers themselves if they don't want to see map markers. If you're the sort of person who doesn't find that immersive, there are plenty of ways to turn that off, either through modding or through actual settings. Doesn't matter, it's an option. You don't need to do it as a writer. Map markers allow a player to consider their time. Am I going to be in that area? Have I explored that area already? Yes, that's near something I know. I can fast travel there and move on. Map markers are really nice to have. They're not vital in interior spaces. In interior spaces, they're great to leave out because then you need to explore the interior more. So if it's in a small to medium-sized cave and you need to find a couple things, you don't need to mark each of them individually. You can have that be an element of searching. But if it's the full world expanse, use map markers. Just, that's the player's choice, not yours. All right. Moving on from journey to your destination. Here are some ways to incorporate surprise. So let's say that the quest giver said that they needed you to find Bonnie, and they were all torn up about it. And then you get there and Bonnie is a goat. That is a surprise. Same thing if it's my boy is missing, get my boy, and the boy is actually an adult who's living his best life. It's interesting to have that subversion of expectation. So that also applies to objects, less so if they cannot be seen in the real world. If they're just something that is looted, it's not as important. But if it's some sort of statue, some sort of book, there's a fetch that you do in Solstheim where you are fetching a folio for a noble woman, and she tells you that it's a rare book, and you get there and the rare book is the first edition of the Lusty Argonian Maid. So that gives you a bit of a laugh and keeps you engaged. It doesn't have to be huge, but it can be a little joke like that or a little surprise. So think about making the identity of the fetch target a little bit less standard. Destinations can include ethos with moral dilemmas. If you need to get the object, you desecrate the shrine or break into the graves to get it. Usually you do, but you still have to think about it. Let's say that a thief stole an amulet and you're trying to get it back. The thief needs the amulet to save lives or can't live themselves without it. Do you take it back? What do you decide is the best course of action to take at this point in the fetch? Destinations can also have puzzles, which are a great way to incorporate something more logical in. And then one of my favorites is if you've traveled the whole time, don't overuse this one, but you've gone through all the steps, you've journeyed, you get there, and the object you're supposed to find is broken. Or the person you're supposed to find is dead. You have to wonder, what do I do now? Do I bring the broken object back? Do I just tell the NPC that the person they had me fetching is dead? What do I do now? So having that in your back pocket for the occasional quest, not all of them because it does frustrate the players quite a bit, is a great way to keep a player on their toes. Sometimes when you are asked to get something, you can't get it. You do not always need to succeed as a player. And finally, return reward. This is a great time to incorporate moral dilemmas and ethos because you have to decide what to tell people, decide whether to give things back to people. Examples are, do you say that this woman's son was a deserter or that he went mad in the underbelly of Riften, whatever it is? Do you return poison to someone you know might kill with it? Another way to spice up your return is to add an alternate reward or a additional reward. So if the NPC said they were going to pay you 500 gold for something, and you go and you do it and you come back, the NPC can then admit that they don't actually have 500 gold. But they'll teach you some archery, and that means that as a writer, you can have your player have the option of killing the NPC for being dishonest and saying that they had something they don't, or accepting the reward and the buff instead. You have choices then at the end if there is an alternate reward offered. Skill bumps are fabulous. I love skill bump rewards so much. I know you can't use them all the time, but my God, I wish you could. Because even if they don't apply to you, they're still exciting. If you were playing a warrior and you get a mage skill bump, you're still psyched about it. It's still cool. You still get experience, and even if you didn't get experience, it feels like you got something special, as opposed to gold, where it really doesn't. One thing you can do with your return, on your return journey or at your return destination, you can have an ambush. Maybe the NPC who gave you the quest didn't actually want you to succeed. They wanted you to die trying. Or maybe they found out you found out too much information, so they need to take care of you that way. This can also mean that you, if you found something very cool, don't actually need to give it back to the NPC because you can fight the NPC instead. Ambushes are fun. And then I think my favorite in terms of return and reward surprise options is a different recipient. If you go because one NPC told you to and you come back and that NPC is dead or missing, or the reward comes from someone else because it turns out that that person has disappeared or was found guilty of a crime, that's fun because it means that time has passed while you were gone. Interesting things happened in other people's lives while you were doing your thing. It builds the world simultaneous to you doing a straightforward fetch quest. I think one of my favorites, I don't remember what game it's from, of the different recipient one is a knight tells you that he is looking to kill a demon. And you go, and the demon offers you a deal, or you have to fight and kill the demon. And if you take the demon's deal, your quest says that you should go back and lie to the knight and say that you definitely killed the demon. Well, you go to the map marker, and the knight is dead. And there's a note on his body from the demon that says, sometimes there are consequences for your actions. That's really cool. That's memorable because it's not at all what you expect to happen. You expect to be able to lie to the knight and maybe be successful, maybe not. You expect to get away with what you did, and you can't. But essentially, that is still a fetch. You are just going, killing a thing, and bringing it back or reporting back that you did the thing. And if you do kill the demon, it is a straightforward fetch in that you go and you tell the knight that you did so, and you're done. But I love that there's that option of a different recipient and a different ending when you try and return to the quest giver. So, ripple effects. Ripple effects happen in the world after you complete a quest. This is all quests, not just fetch quests, but it can work really well with fetch quests. Unlockable content. I don't know if you remember, but the Malakath quest at the Orc Stronghold near Riften has to be unlocked by a fetch quest first. The orcs do not trust you unless you complete a fetch quest. This is an example of unlockable content. If you don't do the fetch quest, no Malakath for you. Relationships can also change, and that's the relationships with the NPC who gave it to you, also relationships with an entire town or even an entire region based on what you did during your quest. And lastly, there are actual world space changes, visual changes that can occur. For instance, going back to the Gildergreen quest, the tree in the middle of Whiterun, once you complete that quest, comes into blossom. The space around you has actually changed. And because of that, you are able to see the effects of what you did, and you are engaged in your environment. So before we finish up, I want to talk about a terrible fetch quest that I just detest, and then one that's really good. So I don't know if you've played a Return to Your Roots, but it is the worst. It is given to you via a journal, so automatically, very little emotional connection to this. Your task is to find 30 identical objects, Crimson Nirnroots. And where are they? Blackreach. They're all in Blackreach. You know, the dark place. The place where you can't see anything. You have to find 30 identical objects. There is no logic to it. They grow randomly. There is no emotional connection and there is no ethical connection. So none of those actually apply. You're just finding things. And then you figure out who to give those to because the person who owned the journal is dead. You find the journal writer's apprentice, hand over some Nern roots, and you get a admittedly relatively cool buff. But there's no connection. Why does she care about the Crimson Nern roots? What's she going to do with them? We don't know. Because the quest writers of this particular quest didn't care. Don't write quests like a return to your roots. Good fetch quest. Unfathomable depths. Really nice. This is a reverse fetch. You are actually returning something as opposed to getting something. This is given by a mad Argonian woman in Riften, and you have to go into a dwarven ruin to replace this cube that she and some others stole. If you do not do that, she will continue to be mad. And she is desperate. So you have that emotional connection to her. Of course, it's interesting to obtain because it is a dwarven ruin. They are inherently surprising. There are puzzles, so it's logical. But also, there are echoes and storytelling throughout. You see the ghostly images of the expedition that originally stole the cube. Who were they? There's one person who's really trepidatious about this whole endeavor. There's one person who's way overconfident. You can get to know these ghostly NPCs as you go through the ruin. And so that connects to your emotions as well. And then the rewards are really good loot and also a power. So you feel like all of your time slogging through that was worth it. When you get back, the NPC that gave it to you, the Argonian woman, is no longer mad. She doesn't remember giving you the quest. She doesn't remember anything, but she's fine now. So you don't know how that happened, which is always a good touch. And you don't have any control over it, except to complete her quest and come back. I love this quest, and this entire thing is a single miscellaneous quest line. Return the cube. That's it. That's all it says. There are no journals. There are no secondary stages. It's a fetch. But it's such a good fetch. So, we have 6 minutes left. Does anybody have questions? And I will actually get out of the PowerPoint so that I can see if anybody's written anything. Question?
So we have one from Aiden. Says about moral choices like stealing something from a shrine or doing something unsavory. How are some ways you can make it a choice versus just deciding not to do the quest? What are some reasonable lengths to go to provide reasonable player choice?
You can, if you are interacting with an NPC at the destination, change your destination. This is the unjournaled but still double. I'm blanking on the name, but in the miscellaneous quest, if it says find something, you can then get another one that says whatever the new NPC wants you to do instead. So it doesn't have to be a fully extensive thing, but say you had the thief cornered and you then decide with the thief. Maybe the thief wants you to return and lie about them being dead, or you weren't able to find them, or whatever it is. That can now be your objective without it actually needing to be journaled, and you can alter your trajectory. Does that make sense? Is that basically what you are going for? Or cool.
I wanted to make a point just regarding your point about map markers that you made earlier, in terms of markers in quests, I wanted to just add there that obviously we want to consider the fact that a lot of people who play Skyrim will have their map markers on, and by default, that's how the majority of quests function in Skyrim. So we need to consider that. However, I would want to add the caveat that we shouldn't see that as a cop out for not including diegetic ways in which the player can actually achieve that quest without the marker. Especially because there's moments in certain Skyrim quests that I'm failing to remember off the top of my head, whereby the player is not explained how to actually achieve or where to go, or like how to achieve the quest or where to go specifically, and it's just given by the map marker. So if you think about that from a purely diegetic standpoint, it breaks immersion. So providing the player with these ways in which they can achieve the quest internally without a map marker while still providing it is, at least in my opinion, the way that we can push writing further. And also it then does provide a way for those players who choose to have their map markers off to still experience the quest in its fullest potential.
Oh, I totally agree with that. And I think that there are great ways to use certain sections without map markers if you have to. But if you are, for instance, saying there's a cave on the other side of the mountains, you should say how to get to there so that the people who have their markers off can still play. But you definitely want to have the option of location. Otherwise, you're just going to be searching an entire mountain. So,
Yeah, everything in dialogue is a chance to give subtle direction to the player. That's what game writing's all about.
I also have one question regarding what you said about that it is hard to make an emotional connection to quests that you get unverbally. But would it be? I definitely agree that it's hard to compassionately connect to those quests since there's no one to connect to. But if you make those fetch quests like uh, personal to you, for example, you discover that you're missing an item from your house or from your inventory, then you have that like desire for revenge or something like that, and it can be just a quest like your stuff, your Wobbajack is stolen, and then you have to just find it and get it back. Like a threatening letter from a demon, from a Daedra, or from some cult worshipper. You know where they are, and they threaten you. So, like, if you do not act upon it, they can ambush you, for example. And if you do act upon it, you just get there and obliterate the cult or whatever. So, would those examples be like good things in quests?
I think there would definitely be good things in quests. I think that it complicates a fetch quest because if I had a quest where it was like find who stole my Wobbajack, and then I received a letter, and then I had to find the person, it would be long enough that I would consider that a good candidate for a more extensive quest structure than something that is a straightforward fetch. In general, and again, everything is different each time, but in general, a fetch quest starts with being given. It doesn't start with another event prior.
Yes, that makes sense. But it would be like the only way you could make unverbal fetch quests have some emotional meaning to anyone.
Yeah, no, that's why I say
Yeah,
they're very difficult to incorporate that way. Doesn't mean they're bad. You can do a lot of things with that. You just need to know you're not working with people's emotions when you do that.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for your answers.
Sure, no problem. I think I need to sign off so that the next presenter can get going.
Yeah. If anybody has
Nicely done.
questions related to game writing, you are super, super welcome to keep asking her, or in lecture or in game writing chat, probably is the best place. And yeah, AFBates, thank you so much. Virtual claps.